So we're very excited to continue our day. Thanks, Norm, for a wonderful, thought-provoking opening keynote. And the rest of our morning, we're going to be talking about technology and how rural communities can harness technology. And in particular, we're going to be highlighting research done as part of our Research Partnerships project, but also as part of a larger initiative that the Moneson Centre has been conducting in partnership with the Eastern Ontario Regional Network, a major broadband initiative, which you'll hear about through the morning here in Eastern Ontario, as well as various ministries from the Ontario government, the Economic Development and Trade, the Ministry of Rural Affairs, and Ministry of Government Services. And so the Moneson Centre has been doing quite a bit of work over the past 3 years now on how to assess impacts of broadband in rural communities, and now actually starting to assess some of those impacts. And that's going to be the thrust of our next two presentations. And so for each presentation, as with some of our research presentations this afternoon, we'll be having our academic researchers present their research in a user-friendly way. We always tell them, scale back those methodology slides at the beginning of your presentations and get to what people really want to hear is what's the results of the study. And then we're going to have commentary from community partners who are engaged in the research, impacted by the research, to talk about how the research makes a difference for them. So our first presentation, we're very pleased to welcome Dr. Alina Ivas, one of our economists at the School of Business. And then joining Alina, as she talks about her economic analysis of broadband impacts in Canada, we have Lisa Severson and Laura Bradley from the Eastern Ontario Regional Network. So we'll welcome them to come forward.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Jeff, and thanks a lot, conference organizers. This conference is great every single year, and I enjoy my experience here. My name is Alina Ivas, and today I will be presenting the paper titled The Employment and Wage Impact of Broadband Deployment in Canada. This paper is co-authored with Matthew Boland, and in 10 minutes I will try to give you an overall idea behind the paper and summarize the results and minimize methodology, as Jeff said. Our paper motivated by the fact that government spends hundreds of millions of dollars on broadband deployment in Canada, and a lot of these funds are allocated to rural and remote areas. It is commonly believed that broadband deployment will provide opportunities to residents and businesses in rural areas similar to those that exist in metropolitan centers. In fact, the evidence also suggests that broadband deployment reduces the costs of doing business in remote locations. At the same time, our understanding of the true impact of broadband deployment on economic activity and regional growth is limited. So in this study, we are looking at the major unresolved question. We are analyzing the economic impact of broadband. And our goal is to understand how does broadband deployment impact economic growth and regional growth specifically. In this paper, we'll look at labor market activity. To be more specific, we're interested in understanding the impact on employment and wage growth. The paper is different from what exists nowadays in current literature in 4 important respects. First of all, this is the first study to evaluate the impact in Canada specifically. In the study, we attempt to measure the true causal impact rather than mere association or relationship between economic activity on one hand and broadband deployment on the other hand. We are focusing on Canada, and that is our big advantage because Canada was the first country to introduce broadband in 1997, and by using Canadian data, we are able to measure impact over a prolonged period of time, and this allows us to make sure that the impact is realized. And we will see that of critical importance, we distinguish between goods and service industries, and this distinction turns out to be critical. Our unit of analysis in this paper is 69 economic regions of Canada. We divide those regions into rural and urban based on whether a region contains a census metropolitan area or it does not. We focus on 14-year period from 1997 to 2011, and we relate economic and wage growth, which is our outcome variables, to broadband deployment, or specifically change in broadband availability across economic regions in Canada. And we also control for a large set of initial or permanent characteristics such as population density, educational attainment, firm and establishment side, etc. Perhaps the key challenge when measuring the impact of broadband deployment is that broadband deployment is influenced by a lot of factors that are related to economic activity itself. And it is also the case that economic activity itself influences broadband deployment. As a result, it is quite hard to isolate the change in economic activity that is attributable to a change in broadband availability and not some other factor. And to address this concern, we develop a simple approach where we use elevation variation in elevation within a given region to explain broadband deployment. We argue that it is simply more expensive to deploy broadband in mountainous area, and as a result, elevation variation can be used to explain the change in broadband availability across regions in Canada. And this approach, we argue, allows us to measure the change in economic activity that is driven by the change in broadband availability and not some other related factor. Brief description of the data we use. Our labor data is from the labor force survey. We focus on those 3 years, 97, 2005, and 2011. Broadband data is provided by CRTC and Industry Canada. This is national broadband coverage data. The data provide us with detailed records of broadband availability across Canada. It was collected in 2 separate rounds. The first round was conducted at the community level in November 2005. The second round was at a more detailed hexagon level. That data was collected during several times from July 2009 to March 2012. Hexagon regions were surveyed based on 3 types of broadband availability: DSL, cable, and fixed wireless. And for each of these technology, broadband availability was recorded as a binary variable: 1 if, for example, DSL is available, and 0 otherwise. We match these 2 data sets, and as a result, our final data focuses on over 4,000 communities. It is also worth mentioning that we focus on average availability. We treat DSL, cable, and fixed wireless equally, and we focus on average availability regardless of technology. To give you a brief review of the data, you can see here the fraction of communities depending on their availability for broadband availability for 2 different periods, 2005 and 2009. This, for example, column shows that in 2009, around 47% of communities had no broadband of any technology. And then among those that had at least some technology available, 35 had only one, either DSL or cable or wireless. And you can see that the picture for 2012 is much different. The distribution is more skewed to the right. For example, the number of communities with no broadband whatsoever dropped to 10% from 47 to 10, quite a substantial drop. And the number of communities with only one technology available dropped to 27. So again, this picture shows you that we did see substantial changes in broadband availability, and our goal now is try to relate these changes to changes in economic environment. So this is the preview of the results. I will first show you the results for the employment growth, and after that I will briefly summarize the results for the wage growth. So for the employment growth, results are quite striking. If we look at all regions at the same time and evaluate the average impact, we see no impact whatsoever. We see that broadband deployment in economic regions did not have impact on employment growth. But that picture changes once we distinguish between rural and urban communities. So what is going on is that broadband deployment promotes employment growth in rural communities at the expense of urban. And that's why on aggregate we don't see impact. It is also interesting, and I found it quite striking, that the distinction between industries plays a crucial role. Specifically, we don't see any impact on employment growth in goods industries. And we do observe impact in service industries, and that impact, again, we see expansion in employment growth, increase in employment growth in rural at the expense of urban regions. Specifically, I would like to show you the impact for individual industries. So you can see these 4 industries on top here. In these industries, we observe that broadband deployment promotes employment growth in rural regions and has no impact on employment growth in urban regions. At the same time, in, for example, professional, scientific and technical services, business, building and other support services, we see positive impact in rural and negative impact in urban regions. These are the list of industries where we observe no impact. On top here, these are goods industries, and again, we don't observe impact on employment growth in goods industries. And at the bottom here, there are some service industries where we still don't observe any impact. Wage growth results are different. Here we do not see differential impact between rural and urban regions. We find that broadband deployment promotes wage growth in both rural and urban regions without differential impact. And here are some industries where this impact is particularly strong. And again, we find no impact on wage growth in goods industries. So to give you some understanding of our results, we decided to look at the following scenario. Suppose all communities within a given region move from having no broadband whatsoever in 1997 to having at least one technology available in 2012. Our estimates predict that in this specific scenario we will observe the following impact. We will see that service employment growth will rise in rural regions. It will rise by 1.17 percentage points per year. So if annual growth in rural regions was around 3%, then we will see now the increase by 1.17 percentage points, that is from 3 to 4.17%. That will be accompanied by decline in employment growth in urban regions, and the decline is of very similar magnitude, 1.21 percentage points. At the same time, we will see that wage growth will be promoted in rural and urban regions alike, and that estimate is increased by roughly 1 percentage point. So to briefly summarize, in this paper we conducted the first empirical assessment of the economic impact of broadband, and we found that broadband deployment in Canada from 1997 to 2011 promoted rural employment and wage growth in service industries. And these results suggest that broadband deployment helps businesses in service industries overcome geographical barriers that have traditionally hampered rural employment growth. And in doing so, broadband deployment limits rural-urban employment gap. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So while we have the technology changing here for us, to introduce myself, I'm Laura Bradley. I'm the lead engineer for the Eastern Ontario Regional Network, or as we're fondly known, the Techies. With me I have Lisa Severson, our Communications and Stakeholder Relations Officer, who deals with a lot of the public for us. It's a great pleasure for us to be here this morning. I see lots of familiar faces, so we don't have a lot of time, and we're going to try and keep as much time for questions. Lisa and I are here till about noon, so if you have any questions, please come see us in the break if we don't get to them during this session itself. This is an overview of what we're going to address. For those of you that aren't familiar, basically, this was an initiative started by the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus to obtained funding to help build out a broadband network through rural Eastern Ontario. It's unlike any other broadband program in Canada, and I can say that because I've worked on ones for the province and the feds. So one of the big differences here was our objective was not 1.5 megabits per second, excuse me, which was the national service mark, but rather 10 megabits per second. And we set that goal in 2008, and the reason we set that goal is because we said people need speed, and we don't know all the things they're going to use it for, and if we want to build a plan with a long time frame, we're going to need a lot of speed. One of the important things to understand is a lot of the motivation by the caucus was to do this was for economic development. Anyone who works in the transition from the 20th century to the 21st century in communications and technology like I didn't need a lot of statistics, a lot of analysis behind it. We knew the evolution rate of technology was outperforming anything we could match within our industry. We knew that it was the future of business, and we knew without it, people would suffer in rural regions. And living in those regions, it was important for us. We've also known since 2004 that our businesses have been clamoring for better broadband, better speeds, and asking for something to be done. I'm not going to get into all the details of specifically what's on this slide. The gap analysis, actually, the first one started in 2005 with the caucus and the CFDCs, who some of them are here, helped quite a bit in pulling that together. The reality is the point of this slide is to tell you this took a lot of effort. It's not necessarily a lot of manpower hours, it was a lot of years. And the years were a lot of planning, a lot of talking, a lot of negotiating. The amounts of negotiations we did with both our federal and provincial partners, not to mention our private sector partners, would astound most people. This is not a little initiative. You don't sit back and wait for a program to come out with all the right rules. You actually go and make a program that fits for your community. And I speak to a lot of rural communities and I tell them the same thing. Find what you can and then make it fit for you and make sure that it works. Mr. Jim Pine, for those of you who know him, is one of our co-leads. It's one of his favorite slides. The point of the slide is Eastern Ontario is a really big place with a lot of people. It's not a little set of towns isolated in the middle of nowhere. It's bigger than 109 countries, 50,000 square kilometers, folks, 1.1 million people. After we partnered with the private sector, this is a map that we use to try and explain to people that we leveraged and added so that we have a total of 5,500 kilometers of fiber within our backbone network with our partners Bell and Bell Alliant. This is the most sustainable, survivable rural network, I believe, in the world. And I know that because last year we went and presented in Amsterdam and we talked to a lot of people doing a lot of things in different countries, and we haven't seen anything that looks like this. In that network, this map shows you there's 160 points of presence, or we call them POPs. Basically, as I say to people, what these are, the on and off ramps to the superhighway. So without these things, it's impossible for businesses and internet service providers to get the speeds and connectivity they need to serve people in their homes and businesses. This isn't a trick, it's not complicated, it's not technical, it's just what it is. If you don't have a 401 coming to your town with an on-ramp for you to get on and off of it, you don't have access. It's that simple. 65% of these locations had nothing bigger than a whole 1.5 megabit pipe leaving their community in 2009. That is nothing. Most of you consume more of that in your homes and on your phones in any given day. So imagine an entire town with every business and every house trying to use that for connectivity. This is why it was incredibly slow. So there's actually a slight error on this slide. The backbone was actually in place and operating by 2012. Along with that, we actually have 22 contracts. We deal with 7 different providers in those 22 contracts. We have rolled out 10 megabit services in a variety of technology platforms to probably over 86% of the homes in Eastern Ontario, homes and businesses. This is a huge effort. In addition to that, we do have our satellite platform, which actually brings our numbers to greater than 95% at 1.5. So this is a speed target we set in 2009. And the reality of the situation is we hope that by 2018, our private sector partners are profitable to help us grow the network to have higher capacities, because we don't feel that it'll be sufficient anymore before we end our project in 2024. But if you don't have a backbone and you don't have a network and you don't have partners willing to invest, you can't get those speeds. Because the sheer problem is an economic issue of not enough paying revenue to justify the cost of the capital. It's not complicated. It's very simple, it's very basic, and if you talk to any service provider, they will tell you it's the same story over and over again. I'm going to now transfer to Lisa, who's going to talk to you about some of the other benefits of the project.
Thanks very much, Laura. Okay, sorry about that. So the EORM project is the largest project on a regional basis, and that was key for us when we went to the federal and provincial government for funding. It had to be something that was encompassed a large region and a number of people. When we started looking at the project, we knew we had to try and shorten the divide between rural and urban pricing. So it was key for us not only to do that for ISPs and businesses that could tap into the network, but also for residents. Because if you build it and no one can afford to use it, it's not worth much. We recognized at the very beginning that the EOWC and EORN would have to be around to actually ensure that the network was utilized. So our project and our board is around until 2024, and we have contractual obligations with the private sector partners to ensure that they perform. We will turn over our 51% ownership to the private sector in 2017, and it's been important to us to have that ownership of the network to show the private sector that we are invested and that we intend to ensure that they grow the network as needed. So we know that it's pivotal for our project to have an impact economically on our region. We know from various surveys, for example, the Hastings County actually did a business retention and expansion survey, and they have their businesses indicated that over 85% of them felt that broadband was one of the key necessities for them to be profitable and to actually stay in business. We have had numerous conversations with various businesses across Eastern Ontario, excuse me, one being that they are a major supplier to an international company and their broadband services are not great, and they are in an industrial park in an urban area, and they have been told that if they can't improve their broadband connectivity to their plant, the international company will leave, will not use them as a supplier, and they employ 200 people. So it's key for broadband for our companies to stay in business. So this is our timeline. So we signed our contribution agreement with the province and the federal government in 2010. We started construction in October of 2010. We will be completed by the end of this year. That's when the funding has run out, and we have to have all of our claims, etc., in by December of 2014. After that, we will be monitoring our contracts to ensure that the private sector meets their requirements, and we will also be trying to leverage the network to demonstrate social and economic benefits in Eastern Ontario. So the next slide, I'm sorry it's small, but these are some of the testimonials that we've had to date from different companies within Eastern Ontario. And I'm going to read the first one to everybody. The higher speed internet has truly allowed us to flourish in the community where we started and where we want to stay. And that's from a representative from Bose Beers. And I think that is key. I think our smaller businesses don't want to leave our region, but if they want to grow, they have to have the tools to do so. And internet plays a very key role in that. We get many calls from industrial parks, and one of the key things that's asked for, it's not only do you have connections to water and sewer, but do you have proper internet connections, and that's key. So with our project, we were able to manage the funding very well throughout the build, and we were able to work on a business park initiative that we will have built out by the end of this year. There are approximately 57 business parks that we'll be bringing a fiber link to support them. And it's key. We have one business park right now in Eastern Ontario that there are two different separate companies looking to come into that business park. One company alone will provide up to 30 jobs in that area. And it's a smaller municipality that is desperate for the fiber connection, because both contracts hinge on whether they can get fiber, the big fiber pipe into their businesses. So we have a 10-year strategic plan, and that's our phase 2, which we're starting to roll into, and it supports the businesses and public information. We are looking at municipal service delivery and how we can enhance that. And we're also looking at a telehome monitoring pilot for Eastern Ontario. So we're working on a variety of different initiatives. We've issued last Friday a gap analysis to look at cell phone coverage in Eastern Ontario, because we know that plays a key role in how folks are serviced, both business and by residents. So the next slide is just going to show you the business parks that we are going to cover. I'm sorry the print is not great. But our one engineer seems to like the color red, and so he uses it in every presentation that he does. So what are the early signs? We have had 30,000 people residents and businesses in the first 18 months subscribe to our network. Our first zone that was completed was in Embrun, and within 8 months after that tower was built, they actually had to refurbish the tower to increase for the demand on the tower. So we know that this is an important project. We know that folks are and they know about the project. They want it to be completed so they can jump on the internet and see where it goes. It's not only DSL or the fiber connection. We know that there are small businesses using our satellite connection that are now able to stay. It's a home-based business that they're able to run. They live on a lake, and they were contemplating having to sell their home because they couldn't have decent connection, and they're now able to stay. One key point is through our project, many hydro poles had to be replaced. They have joint usage contracts with our private sector partners, basically Bell Alliant. And through our project, $8 million worth of infrastructure for hydro poles. That's what it's cost to date. So that not only has it had an impact on our project, but it's helping the infrastructure throughout Eastern Ontario. So I think that's a key point. So what are our expectations? I think we're hoping that in 2015 we can start mapping out some of the benefits a little more clearly as to how our project has been able to impact the region. And we know that there are other studies going to be done on the microeconomic and macroeconomic impact. And that's it. So I don't know how much time.
I think we have time for one, maybe two questions. There's one here.
Thank you very much for the presentation information. The last slide worries me slightly. Is there any data available at this point in time from an economic analysis on the impact of broadband and the impact that it can bring to smaller, medium, and even some of the larger cities within our regions? Like providing that and what the impact is to help justify it?
Alina, I don't know if you might have a comment about availability of data to assess the impacts, and we'll explore that a little bit with Stats Canada and so on.
I'm not sure I understood the question, but I'll try to answer it anyways. Well, data availability is always the most serious concern when you do any sort of econometric analysis. And when we were doing this study, we were lucky enough to receive data from Industry Canada, detailed data on broadband availability. At the same time, we are restricted in our use of labor data. Our labor data is not detailed enough, so it does not permit the analysis at a more detailed level. We can't focus on, for example, Eastern Ontario specifically, or even on a given province. So these are the constraints that we are facing, and Statistics Canada does have more detailed data available, but there are a lot of restrictions associated with data usage, so hopefully in the future we will be able to get access to the data and do analysis at a more detailed level.
I think it might be something that will be explored in our panel in a few minutes too, Bob.
There is
Oh, sorry.
international data, but there's nothing local. There's nothing in Canada done at that scale. There are international projects, but not.
David, you had a question?
Yes, I'm going to ask a question which will be unpopular in this room, but that's my job. I'm a tenured professor. Alina, if I understand your presentation correctly, service growth, for every new employee in rural areas, there will be a decline service employment in urban areas. And I also understand from the second presentation that this rollout of broadband across the rural area requires significant upfront capital subsidies. Could someone explain to me why urban regions should subsidize this? I think you're going to have a really good answer for this.
Well, I hope I do have a really good answer for that. I should have been more clear in discussing the results. So we do observe a decline in urban regions, but that is a decline in employment growth. So employment in urban regions is still growing, but at a slower rate, yes.
So why should urbanites be happy about that and subsidize it?
Do you like solar farms?
Well, happiness is an entirely different issue in my opinion.
Very good. Well, great question. We have to wrap it up there, but if you have more questions, we encourage you to talk with our panelists on one of the breaks. And so let's thank Alina, Lisa, and Laura. We have a small gift for you.